you, so.
Good morning, Team Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you. You will have 20 minutes to present your solution to the judges. You will be given a warning when 5 and 2 minutes remain. After 20 minutes, the presentation will be stopped immediately and no information will be considered after the 20 minutes have lapsed. Following the presentation, there will be a 10-minute question and answer. You will be given a warning when 2 minutes remain, and the question and answer session will be stopped after 10 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. We are Team Bravo, and today we'll be presenting on Bayer's solution for long-term viability. My name is Abigail Robinson. My apologies. Oh, could I take that? Thank you so much. My name is Abigail Robinson, and I am a student studying international business, accounting, and French.
My name is Eileen Quinn, and I am studying international business as well as Spanish language.
My name is Peter Meyer. I am studying international business and political science.
Good morning. My name is Tyson Pagniak, and I am studying international business as well as finance. So the focus of today is not climate change itself, but how the Bayer Carbon Initiative can combat global emissions. We have all heard of terms such as corporate social responsibility, as well as using sustainable practices. However, these terms tend to lack substance as well as action. We want to take the Bayer Carbon Initiative and build solutions based on, or aim towards short-term implementation that will also provide long-term viability in reducing carbon emissions. To further understand the problem, we first have to identify the industry that Bayer is currently operating in, as well as the underlying driving factors of that industry. At the most macro level, Bayer is operating in the agricultural industry, in which global demand for agricultural products is expected to rise 15% by 2029. But more specifically, pertaining to this case, we want to look at the crop farming industry. Now, the framework for the general environment portrays underlying factors for any industry. For the crop farming industry itself, the main economic factor is going to be capital, apologies, and its availability to farmers. This will determine agricultural inputs such as livestock, irrigation, seeds, fertilization, as well as things like land, labor, and equipment. All decisions that farmers make are based on the availability of capital to invest. As for political and legal factors, the industry is currently operating under the framework of the Paris Accords, which is working towards reducing carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. Countries also have to comply with international trade agreements in which countries agree to produce certain agricultural commodities to maintain the balance of trade. As we have seen, there are also many technological advancements. This includes advancements in farming technology, mechanization, as well as data collection. And as we have seen throughout the world, there are also ecological factors that can affect any industry. These include adverse weather conditions, as well as possible changes to hydrological cycles.
As a global industry leader, Bayer shares the responsibility as well as the opportunity to reduce CO2 emissions. On a short-term perspective, looking at a timeline by about 2030, Bayer is hoping to support 100 million smallholder farms. So in Bayer's perspective, a smallholder farm qualifies within the size of about less than or equal to 5 acres in size. Moving to more long-term, Bayer is hoping to reduce CO2 emissions to 0% by 2050.
Our first strategic approach to this problem is to use approach to this situation is to address two theaters, the United States and the United Nations. By addressing the United Nations using Articles 16 and 18 of the Paris Accords, we hope to see the Bayer Carbon Initiative become a supervisory base for the further implementation of carbon reduction practice. With that in mind, we also intend to address the United States government by an expansion of our current lobbying practice. We would like to see the cooperation with other parties in terms of establishing subsidies, expanding initiatives and incentives for good practice regarding land use, and the standardization of pricing in the carbon market. Given the complex nature, there are three main issues and 4 benefits that we would like to address. The benefits of becoming a supervisory body include the influence not only on the international conservation effort, but also on the legislative process behind it. We become central in the transparent agriculture data collection. This allows us to further the R&D. We have an opportunity to aid in the standardization of carbon market pricing, increasing the efficiency of sub-market. I lost my place, I'm sorry. Lastly, we see the expansion of the carbon initiative customer base through recognition of our position as a supervisory organization and minimally disrupt our current customer base. The 3 detriments we see to this approach are increased government ties in limiting our organizational flexibility and information reactivity. We would also see limited profitability from seeking government funding. Lastly, we would see the restricted implementation of company values due to the compromising nature of political cooperation.
Our second solution for Bayer concerns alternative wetting and drying of rice. So for our solution, rice production covers around 405 million acres globally, and 0.17 tons of carbon are created per acre. So through implementing alternative wetting and drying rice, we are able to reduce global carbon emissions on a global sense. And so if you look at the handout on our last page, we have included from our sources some information and kind of a graphic on how AWD would work in a farming perspective, but more specifically a rice farming perspective.
I'd also like to apologize. Apparently our slides didn't transfer over well, but thankfully you do have the slides, so if you would like to read that information, they are on there. Again, I am very sorry for that technical issue.
So regarding rice cultivation, we suggest that Bayer focuses on Asian markets. Specifically, we suggest China and India. Not only do we suggest these because Bayer does already have a presence within both of these countries, however, China is already the world's largest producer of rice, and India is following closely as the second largest producer. So currently, India is producing over 11% of the world's rice production, and China also averages a yield of 6.5 tons per hectare. And to give some background to this measurement, about 1 hectare is equal to 2.47 acres.
Again, very sorry about the presentation. Something went wrong there. So Luckily, we do have those slides for you. So to promote this sustainable rice cultivation, we actually want to propose a solution to you based off of a program that Bayer already has implemented. The Bayer Carbon Program is an incentive program offered to farmers in which they can report their sustainable practices and receive extra revenue. Currently, the Bayer Carbon Program offers cash incentives for reduced tillage at $3, cover crops at $6, and an adoption of both of these methods at $9 per acre. I also want to mention that we believe that creating another incentive to this program will be a great way for us to reach our goal of lowering carbon emissions as well as supporting 100 million smallholder farms. Before we can get to the pricing of the incentive, we have to look at the current prices offered and why are they priced that way. So as you can see, reduced tillage sequesters about 0.3 carbon tons per acre. Cover crops reduce 0.58 carbon tons per acre, and our proposed solution of the wetting and drying rice method will sequester that carbon by 0.5 tons of carbon per acre. My apologies, 0.15. So our proposed pricing for this is to offer farmers that are using this wetting and drying method of rice $1 per acre, since it does produce it does sequester less carbon than the other current options. Although it is a lower amount, rice does, as we saw earlier, count for such a large amount of the crops produced globally, which is why we think this would be a beneficial method to implement. I'd also like to mention that to incentivize these small farmers, which is one of our main goals, we will be offering this specific incentive, the wetting and drying of rice, up to a rate up to 50 times per, of the $1 per acre for those farmers who are on who do have land of 2 hectares or less. And this will also be contingent on the GDP that the country has to see the worth of their dollar and the impact of their rice production. This will also only be offered, this special incentive and special pricing will only be offered in the Asian markets. So we found in our research that the wetting and drying method with rice cultivation has many issues of implementation because of the technological barriers. So we propose that Bayer offers research and development to create a comprehensive guide for these farmers of how they can work on the wetting and drying method of rice. To do this, we think that the research can be done using field view technology that Bayer already has implemented for many of their farmers and the incentive program. We also know that this is going to be pricey for us to implement all of this change, so we need to have some sort of income. We realized that the field view program can be used to see the data of the soil that the farmers are showing to Bayer to see the amount of carbon being reduced, to check their different incentives. We can use that data to tell our customers which Bayer products we would like to promote to them that can make their soil better. We also want to include that this will have to be accepted by the consumer from a privacy standpoint, because we do realize that the field view technology has many privacy barriers. So again, please refer to your slides that you have there. We don't think that the revenue based from our field view technologies will be just enough. So although this will be super important to the environment and profitable to the environment, it won't be that profitable for us. So we have to find different ways to find money. We found when analyzing the financial statements of Bayer that foreign currency exchange costs this past year for Bayer cost them $2.5 billion. So when we look at the total crop science market for Asia, which is where we will be implementing this new incentive, we see 2% of total sales of crop science being from Asia. So we believe that we can cut about 2% of these costs from translation pricing, which will give us about $50 million in saved expenses. We also want to go back to earlier when we mentioned our field view technology of the promotion of our products. We think that that can bring in about 1% of revenue in the crop science sector of Bayer, which will create $200 million of extra revenue annually. That gives us a budget of $50 million for R&D and $150 million for the budgeting of the new incentive program.
So after looking at both benefits and drawbacks from each solution, our recommendation would be to implement an expansion on the already existing Bayer carbon program. This will give us a new reach in the rice markets in the Asian region, as well as updating the incentive programs to incentivize rice farmers to adopt a more technical process in rice cultivation, which in turn can reduce carbon emissions in rice cultivation by up to 90%. As she mentioned, we can cut expenses in foreign transaction costs, as well as increase or add a stream of revenue with advanced field view technology by providing or directly promoting Bayer products. Although this does not although this does not accomplish our ultimate goal of net zero carbon emissions, this does play a key role in our current strategic focus of short-term implementation with long-term viability. At this time, we would like to answer any questions you may have.
Yep, feel free to.
I guess my first question is, I thought you stated at the beginning of the presentation the problem quite well, what we were trying to address. I'm curious as to, so you offered a lobbying solution and then the one dealing with the Asian rice fields. What other alternatives in tackling the problem did you consider, and how did you filter your way down to these solutions?
Yeah, great question. First, we really looked into regenerative farming. So that's where we kind of started. And in that, we focused on pasture roaming. But once we had the panel and we realized that your main consumer is grain farmers who feed cattle, we realized that that would affect other parts of your business. And after hearing a little bit about Asian markets and wanting to expand into those Asian markets, we decided to come up with a way in which we already had established presence in which we could reduce a significant amount of carbon.
Thank you.
So in addition to looking at the market data, did you also look at the financials in terms of the different alternatives? And where did the financial data lead you to pick the alternative that you chose?
So again, when we were looking at the regenerative farming options, we didn't yet get to financial or researching financial data on that. And once we realized that that was no longer viable for us, then we kind of switched focus.
So let me ask you a question. Like, what are the things that you believe that need to be in place, or what are the factors that need to exist for that approach to be successful?
Well, we believe that environment sustainability and reducing carbon emissions is not going to be possible without incentivizing both the public, the farmers, basically everyone that's involved in carbon emissions, which is why we have things like carbon credits, things like that. So that's why a large focus of it was based on the incentive program, because we feel that money runs the world. So if we can offer these people more money to create sustainable efforts, they're winning and we're winning as well.
Just to add on to that quick, in the research that we conducted, it provided us details with wetting and drying rice method being very technical and Asian governments not funding this due to their climate change being low on their totem pole. So if with the Bayer Carbon Initiative and that being quite high on their totem pole, the incentive to provide them with the technical analysis and training would really help with that.
So the flip side is like, what are the barriers that you think you would find in executing that strategy?
One thing I think we consider a lot was technology, especially in the Asian regions, as we learned from your panel yesterday, that they're not always an issue, but when you get to areas within farming, specifically rice in Asia, it is a little bit difficult to maintain a strong connection with technology. So that was something that we also saw as another barrier.
To add on to that, we would have to approach each country on a case-by-case basis in terms of just legally what we can do and how we can work with programs that the country already has in place. We don't want to cause problems with the nation's current incentive programs.
We don't want to step on anyone's toes, especially the government's.
And when you think of, and I know you positioned this as a short-term kind of an implementation with hopefully long-term viability. So if you think about the breadth and scale of Bayer, how is this alternative scalable? So if you start with this one, how is that scalable to other, to reach the lofty goals that we set out?
Absolutely. So like we said, we're starting this incentive program in Asia, but rice farming is not only done in Asia. So to start with it, that's where it'll be, but we can grow that across the globe
So in the research that we came up with, there are 570 million tons of carbon emissions in farming. And so 12% of that comes from rice farming. So we discovered that there were 405 million acres of rice farms globally, and that's how we come up with that number. And then to scale that, I lost my train. Yeah.
We believe it is scalable based off the amount of rice production in the world.
We also, with the long-term viability, we're putting an emphasis on providing an avenue for that R&D to really shine, to keep the current initiatives financially viable so we can keep expanding.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add one more thing on that. Like I mentioned, the foreign currency exchange, if you are keeping the money in the country that you are receiving the money, you're going to deal with a lot less foreign currency exchange. So that is another way that we will be able to keep funding this, is that reduced expense, the more countries we enter.
So following up on that answer on the foreign exchanges, did you do an analysis that you're going into China and India? The majority of the foreign transactions in those two countries, that you're able to get the payback from those two countries and you implement it there?
No, we unfortunately did not have time in the past 2 days to get that far into it. So that is why we just took 2% of the foreign currency transactions based on the amount of sales in the crop science.
Okay.
I would have loved that though, for foreign currency is very exciting for me.
Did you consider like an executional approach in those countries that's not necessarily Bayer by itself? partnerships, like, how you would actually kind of like go to those countries? Did you consider that?
Again, it has to be on a case-by-case basis. For each country, it's going to be different. Each country is going to have different programs in place, and for this presentation, we just didn't have the time to delve into multiple hypothetical situations.
Who do you consider the competitors to your solution here? Who are you competing with in these markets?
I think here, our biggest, with the incentive program, our biggest competitor is actually the governments in these different countries. They're already trying to follow the Paris Accords and other carbon emission reductions that they've set for themselves. And a lot of them that we found in our research do try and only offer the government solutions, and then you can't get outside incentives from other companies like Bayer. So I think that would definitely be a competitor that we'd have to work around.
Okay. Good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.